Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Say that you love me, don't say that you love me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. You say that you want me, don't say that you want me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. I still like an orphan, I guess, and my heart breaks to confess. Even while you hold me, 'cause I cry on the floor. I still don't know how to be yours. You say that you love me, don't say that you love me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. You say that you want me, don't say that you want me, 'cause I don't know how to be yours. I still like an orphan, I guess, and my heart breaks to confess. Even while you hold me, 'cause I cry on the floor. Still don't know how to be yours. Lord, speak now. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Clear my mind, oh Lord, clear my mind. Bring me peace that I cannot find. Take my worry thoughts, break my pride. Clear my mind, oh Lord, clear my mind. Wake my soul, oh Lord, wake my soul. With this mess I made, make me whole. All this life called mine, take control. Wake my soul, oh Lord, wake my soul. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Help my heart to hear your sound. Speak into my life, Lord, speak now. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down.
Hi friends, I have a couple things to bring to your awareness, and that's really all an announcement ever is, but this is more of an announcement about how to keep all things Crosspointe in your awareness as we head into summer. Because for some of us, summer means increased busyness and maybe even increased chaos, which can be fun. Disruption to patterns and rhythms and all that. But it can make communication a little tricky, especially if you're looking for ways to connect. So if you are a small child watching this, wondering how he or she's going to spend their summer, or you're a high school student and wondering what other high school students are doing, or college students, it's the same thing. How do you connect with others? Maybe you're an adult or a parent, or you're not a parent, but maybe you've got little tinies, and you're wondering, do other parents actually get out of the house with their little tinies? Maybe you're a grandparent and your little tinies grew up and had their own little tiny. I don't know why I'm calling children little tinies. I just, in this moment, I like the phrase, but maybe you're in that stage of life. Wherever you are on that spectrum, I want you to know there are several things to be aware of this summer. And so I want to draw your attention to our summer calendar. And you can find it at crosspointe.org/summer. You'll find all kinds of ways to connect with people who are like you or maybe not so like you, and you can come back to it a couple times in the next couple of months just to see what's going on and where you can get connected. So crosspointe.org/summer. And then, as a reminder, or perhaps as maybe it's an invitation, Crosspointe is funded by folks who call Crosspointe their church. But there's no mothership, there's no network that we're part of that sustains us financially. And so if you're one of the people who sort of routinely financially supports what Crosspointe is and does, thank you. keep it up. And if you've not done that before, you've never been asked to, or you never considered it, here's your invitation. There's tons of ways to do it. It's really simple. You can find out more about how to do that at crosspoint.org/contribute, and it'll spell out some ways there. Or from your phone, you can just text crosspointenc to 77977 and get set up from your phone. Okay, so that's everything I have to make you aware of. Hope you have a great day. Love and kindness to all of us.
Today, I'd like to begin our conversation with a reading from the book of Acts, sometimes called the Acts of the Apostles. The author of Acts also wrote the book of Luke, which is one of the 4 Gospels, the stories of Jesus. And although there's a book between them in our biblical canon, Acts picks up where Luke leaves off. Jesus had risen and then hung out with his friends and followers for about 40 days. Then he instructed them to wait in Jerusalem until something powerful happened. They would know it when they saw it. And then Jesus physically left them and ascended into the heavens. Now, our chapter picks up with some of his followers, both men and women, sitting in a room in Jerusalem, waiting obediently as they had been instructed to. Now, outside, Jerusalem was hopping. It was already a diverse city, but this particular time in history, Jews from all over had descended to celebrate Shabbat, or Pentecost, a Jewish holiday. The literal Hebrew meaning is weeks, because it's celebrated 50 days, several weeks after Passover. When this holiday commemorates when the Spirit of God gave Moses the Torah at Mount Sinai, and when the Israelites dedicated themselves to following Yahweh alone. Something similar was about to happen. Christians celebrate this 50 days around that every year. We're a non-denominational congregation, so we don't adhere strictly to the calendar. But today, we're going to talk about Pentecost. Read with me from Acts 2, verses 1. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like a rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues, as of fire, appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem, and at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and the residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Philadelphia, Egypt and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They are filled with new wine." The observers were basically saying, "They're drunk." So Peter was quick to inform the spectators, "Look, it's only 9 in the morning. These people aren't drunk." He went on to explain that what they were seeing and hearing, wind and fire and language, it was the Holy Spirit, which was actually also the Spirit of Jesus, who they likely had seen and had definitely heard about. You know, the guy that had been killed and raised from the dead. People were talking about him. Long story short, a lot of people believed Peter and started following Jesus, even though physically Jesus was long gone. Similar to the events on Mount Sinai, the people felt the Spirit, and they chose to dedicate themselves to God through the way of Jesus. Now, I mainly grew up on the West Coast in earthquake and fire country. We didn't do tornado drills. We did earthquake drills. The mantra of duck and cover, it still rings loudly whenever I hear about an earthquake. In the middle of high school, we left mostly earthquake country and moved to central Tennessee, where I got very close to multiple tornadoes, complete with evacuation to central windowless rooms and cellars, this eerie stillness, the strange color of the sky. But that was nothing compared to the tornadoes that my Texas-born mom used to talk about, lunging from her car and into ditches, and in the aftermath, finding number 2 pencils sticking halfway through trees, full microwaves on telephone poles, neighbors' bikes in the next town over. She always talked about the sound and the force of the wind. People in the East who had never experienced earthquakes before used to ask me if I was ever afraid of them. Maybe a little, but they're there and gone before you have time to think about them. And most are minor and you just go about your business. And I would still say that tornadoes are much more scary because you can see them coming. The anticipation and the weather reports alone might kill you before the high winds do. Now, if you live on a coast, east or west, you're no stranger to wind. We flock to beaches during our hot summers for that small relief that they offer. If you're on the East Coast, like I am, you also know a thing or two about a beach breeze turned hurricane-forced wind. On the other hand, if you're on the West, you might know about the destructive force of fire. I'm thinking specifically about the devastating wildfires in the past years that have taken so many acres and homes and lives. Regardless of where you live, we are all aware of the power of both fire and wind. Now imagine a small room suddenly filled with storm-force wind, hats blown off, hair askew, eyes forced closed, hands over ears, anything not nailed down flying around the room. We weren't told there were any injuries, not any external ones anyway. There was an audible sound of breath wind, the crackle of fire tongues touching all the people in the room, which is both terrifying and kind of gross if you think about it. If you ask any forest ranger or firefighter, they'll tell you that wind can be a threatening, wind and fire combination, can be a threatening and all-consuming grouping. Sometimes God's presence is easier in smaller doses. This was not a quiet event. It got the attention of people on the streets. This event in Acts is what Christians most commonly call Pentecost today. It's quite a big deal in traditional Christianity. But the main event really is only described in 4 verses. It's often been explained as the point in time when the Holy Spirit first came to the people of God who were following Jesus. But this wasn't the first time the Spirit had showed herself, nor the first time that she presented as powerful and potentially destructive earthly elements. Throughout the Bible, we see the Spirit in her role of birther, creator, protector. She was, as we mentioned earlier, on the mountain with Moses. But she was also present from the beginning, as the wind swept across the void as creation began, as breath that gave life into the clay bodies of humans in the garden. The Spirit was present with the Israelites in the desert when she presented as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night in order to act as both protector and reminder that the Israelites had not been abandoned to the wilderness. To the prophet Elijah, the Spirit came to the mountain in the whisper of wind and as fire from the heavens that consumed the altar to the gods of Baal. At the baptism of Jesus, she came as a gentle breeze and the voice of a dove. The Spirit was not new to the earth. She always seems to show up just when things are about to get particularly interesting. And this day of Pentecost was no different. Things were changing. They had to. The disciples had decisions to make because Jesus was no longer around. What was next for them? Perhaps maybe more unsettling than the small natural disaster happening in the room that day, what was happening to the people, both inside and outside the walls. We, of course, don't have firsthand accounts of their experiences, no cell phone footage or interviews, so we can only imagine what it must have been like to have been in that room, and what it must have been like to hear the commotion in that room from the street. How something like that must have changed your perspective, maybe even changed you. How, when you told the story later, you were met with both awe and skepticism. No one meaning can be given to these events, although us religious types have definitely tried. The author is trying to narrate from second or even third-hand accounts, something for which there are no adequate words, although the participants were far from speechless. Quite the opposite. Over the centuries, one way Pentecost has been explained is that it was a miracle of speech. The group that were in that room began speaking in other languages, presumably ones that they did not know. But Pentecost has also been called a miracle of hearing. The observers who came running to find out what in the world was going on in that room were quite diverse. Remember, the text says they were from every tribe under heaven, meaning they didn't have a common culture, religion, nationality, race, gender, language, whatever. But for some reason, they all heard what was being said in their own native language. We might also think of Pentecost as a miracle of listening. Perhaps because Jesus had told his followers to wait in that room until something happened, they found themselves waiting with a posture of expectation, attuned to hear what they hadn't before, or what they wouldn't have heard if they hadn't been listening so well. Because what we often hear depends on what we're listening for. Perhaps their active listening opened their hearts and minds to something that had been waiting there all along. Perhaps they were just now ready to participate in it. Was it a miracle of speaking, of hearing, of listening? Yes. The Spirit had been there all along. But perhaps what was different about this time was that it ignited something within the people that transformed them and spread almost literally like wildfire. The commotion, like it always does, caused the people in the streets to come running to see what was happening. As Peter looked at the crowd and told them they weren't drunk, he offered another explanation by quoting a passage from the prophet Joel, a prophecy that many in the crowd would have known well. And the first part reads, "In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and I will prophesy." I want to read that first line again. I will pour out my Spirit on all people. In other words, what was occurring wasn't just a spectator sport or something for the elite chosen few. It was no accident that this epic, unexplainable, heavenly event happened on a day when the city was at its most diverse. It was an all-inclusive invitation. No assimilation required. And the followers who'd been touched by the fire wind had an interesting reaction to what happened. Just minutes before their lives were turned sideways, they'd been content to sit in a room with those they knew and understood best, and who knew and understood them best. It made sense for them to insulate after all that they had experienced, especially when the people who had killed Jesus were still interested in squashing any remnants of his movement. But after experiencing the all-encompassing breath and fire of Spirit, it seems like they shed the need to shield themselves from the other. Their instinct became expansion rather than constriction, After encountering the Spirit, they felt the need to travel, to go into the diversity of the city and open the doors wide. The other was no longer threatening. It was accepted and adopted and invited. If we were to go a little further into the book of Acts, we would find this group grew exponentially, trying to do their best to live in the inclusive ways of Jesus, selling their personal assets to support the community, caring for those who couldn't offer them anything in return, the poor, the orphan, the widow, the outsider, those who looked and acted and understood things nothing like they did. Tradition tells us that the disciples eventually dispersed and journeyed, not only in their own neighborhoods and regions, but beyond, as they broadened the invitation, most eventually at the expense of their own lives. Thomas went to India, John and Philip to Asia Minor, others to regions near the Black Sea, and most are believed to have died as martyrs. Apparently, they took the for all people thing to heart. And more than that, it expanded their view of humanity. The disciple John is the only one we know of who died of for sure from old age, but not first without spreading the message with his writing. The Jesus followers entered that room in Jerusalem and waited with a posture of listening. And it allowed them to hear and see things they hadn't before. We might not have a transcript, but we know that at least one thing they heard was to open the doors wide and set more seats at the table. Deep listening can open all kinds of doors. There was a different kind of spirit blowing around us these days. It doesn't adhere to the Spirit's Pentecost push for a wider door and a bigger table. I'm talking specifically about white Christian nationalism, which has been called by many the single biggest threat to America's religious freedom. I include the word white because it is primarily, although not all, white individuals who are trying to redefine what it is to be Christian and to rewrite the history of the United States' relationship with Christianity. It's a political movement rooted in white supremacy and couched in religious language, and it seeks to merge Christian and American identities. It conflates love of Jesus with love for America. And it claims that to be a true American is to be a very specific type of Christian. In this false narrative, America's first citizens were all European and Protestant, and therefore white Protestants today should have dominion and dominance in American law and policy. It calls for the United States to be claimed as a Christian nation, which makes anyone non-white or non-Christian second-class citizens. Ruminate on that for just a moment, on all who that leaves out. In Christian nationalistic ideology, God holds America to be sacred above all else, which also means that whoever the right type of Christians endorse or support must also be supported and endorsed by God. That also turns all things patriotic, flags, anthems, historical and political figures, into sacraments. And sacraments must be fought for as they face threats from non-whites, non-Christians, immigrants, and anybody who doesn't think like them. Authoritative rule is necessary to manage all of this and requires heterosexual patriarchal system, and violence is sanctified to make it happen. I want to be clear that Christian nationalism is not the same as being a patriotic Christian. One can love their country and the ideals we say we aspire to without country becoming tribe, an idol, and God. We can love our country and expect the best from it, which means pointing out areas we can do better and where we have not lived up to our highest ideals. In fact, we point out these things and expect better because we care deeply about our country. Because it is so well written, I want to read an excerpt of the statement from Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And I encourage you to go to their website to find out more, to read the whole statement, and to recognize, to help you recognize and oppose white Christian nationalism. This is what their statement says, at least a portion of it. As Christians, we are bound to Christ, not by citizenship, but by faith. Patriotism does not require us to minimize our religious convictions. One's religious affiliation or lack thereof should be irrelevant to one's standing in the civic community. Government should not prefer one religion over another or religion over non-religion. America's historic commitment to religious pluralism enables faith communities to live in civic harmony with one another without sacrificing our theological conviction. Conflating religious authority with political authority is idolatrous and often leads to oppression of minority and other marginalized groups, as well as the spiritual impoverishment of religion. It goes on. As I looked at the text for today, Pentecost and Acts, Christian nationalism kept coming up as a current antithesis of Pentecost. Perhaps that's because of the news and the responses to the news this week. Perhaps that's just because that's on my mind. And let's be clear that Jesus did not support any one government or political party. He spoke of citizenship only when he said to give empire or Caesar what belongs to empire and give to God what is God's. He was opposed to injustice and exclusion, whether it was civic or religious. Let's not forget that the people present at Pentecost were, according to the text, from every tribe under heaven. The Jesus of Christian nationalism would not include most, if any, of the crowd that day. And let's be honest, it wouldn't have included the disciples either because they were too brown, and actually they weren't Christian, they were Jewish. While Christian nationalism calls for uniformity and assimilation, the wind and the Spirit at Pentecost caused expansion, not constriction. The Spirit of Pentecost, the miracle of hearing and speaking and listening, walked outside the doors and told the beautiful diversity of people that day that the Spirit of God falls on all people. The loud voice and influence of Christian nationalism today is not going away. Our current political climate feeds the rhetoric, and if we're not aware of it, if we are not listening for it, the true Spirit of Christ will be swallowed up and become unrecognizable. We must be willing to sound the alarm that the Jesus being promoted is not the one the people at Pentecost would recognize. That's not the Jesus that we follow. That is not the wind and the fire and the spirit of inclusion, wide doors and open tables. We must point out that the Spirit moves people to expansion and inclusion, not insulation and constriction, and certainly not violence in the name of a loving God. Where does that leave us today? Well, it's actually not my job to tell you what to think, just to leave you with my thoughts, and just to give you my thoughts and leave you to them. I do want to draw us back to the idea that perhaps what happened at Pentecost was a miracle of listening, which leaves me with the question in regards to nationalism, but also in my own life. Am I listening? Do I have a posture of listening that allows me to cut through the outside and personal noise and BS so that I might hear things that I hadn't before? What are the dangers of me not really listening? Not just with Christian nationalism, but with my relationships, with myself. How and what does the Spirit nudge you to be listening to and for? Pray with me, please. May we, O God, be quick to listen deeply. not just to the superficial, but to what is growing underneath. May we feel your breath on our faces, gently brushing our skin, but also forcing us from our places of safety. May you give us fire in our bones that refuses to be satisfied with what is, but works toward what can and should be. May our circles grow to look more like that of Pentecost, unlike us, and more like the diversity of your table. Give us tongues to point out mistruth when we see it distorted and wearing your name. May we be includers and expanders and protectors and creators, just like you have shown us how to be. Amen.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.